Why is it that the more we grasp, the more empty we feel? Why does the pursuit of wealth leave a quiet ache in the soul, like trying to drink from a mirage? In the still hours of the night, when the world goes silent, have you ever felt the weight of longing pressing against your chest, not just for money or comfort, but for something deeper, something unnamed? There is a kind of suffering that hides behind ambition. A hunger masked as desire. A silence inside every, if only. The one who lived this silence was called Tenzin. Born in a small fishing village carved into the coast, he had grown up watching his father measure success in coins and sacrifices. Tenzin inherited the chase, wearing it like armor. But each achievement only led to another emptiness, and one day, after a decade of rising and rushing, he found himself standing alone in a glass tower, surrounded by everything he had once prayed for, yet aching as if nothing had ever truly arrived. It was in that silence, in that aching pause between dreams and disillusionment, that his path began. He would later understand that three invisible truths, whispered by life in the most unexpected ways, would unfasten the very grip that once strangled his joy. Three truths not taught, but revealed, like messages carried on the wind, waiting only for stillness to be heard. This is not a tale of giving up, it is the story of returning. Not a warning against wealth, but a remembrance of what wealth truly is. Tenzin's path is not separate from yours. His sorrow might be yours. His revelations, perhaps, the very ones you were born to receive. So lean in. Let the noise fall away. Welcome to Zen Companion, where stillness speaks and stories heal. Let us walk this quiet path together. Subscribe, and never miss the next whisper meant for you. The shift did not begin with thunder. It began with a whisper, one he almost ignored. After leaving yet another meeting, where words about growth projections echoed without meaning, Tenzin stepped into the alley behind his office, needing air. The city pulsed, lights flashing like promises, but his breath felt trapped inside a cage of ribs. That's when he saw her. An old woman, barefoot, sitting on a blanket of newspaper, her hands calmly folding a single origami crane. She did not look up. She did not ask for anything. She simply folded. One slow crease at a time. At her side sat a bowl, not for coins, but for folded cranes. Each a quiet offering. Tenzin stood, frozen. Something in her presence fractured the illusion he had spent years constructing. She looked poorer than anyone he had ever pitied, and yet, she radiated a kind of fullness he had never known. Not the fullness that comes from having, but from not needing. For a long moment, he watched as she gently pressed her final fold and placed the crane into the bowl. She whispered without turning her head. Everything that matters finds you when you stop chasing what doesn't. That single sentence landed like a bell struck in the hollow of his chest. A phrase so simple, it might have been overlooked, if not for the way it echoed inside a part of him long asleep. It wasn't advice. It was a mirror. In her stillness, he saw his noise. In her emptiness, he saw his clutter. That night, he couldn't sleep. The lights of the city that once comforted him now felt loud and unnecessary. And from somewhere deep within, a question arose. Not just what he was chasing, but why. He didn't yet have an answer. But the old woman's words had already opened something. The first invisible truth had been spoken. And though he did not know it yet, it would soon lead him into the sacred unraveling of all he thought he knew. The next morning, Tenzin did what he always did, dressed in precision, scrolled through numbers, performed success. But something had shifted. The coffee tasted metallic. The mirror reflected a stranger. And when he reached for his watch, he paused, fingers hovering as if unsure of time itself. He shook it off. After all, it was just a moment, a woman, a phrase. Life goes on. Right? But the city felt different now. The traffic no longer hummed, it howled. The emails no longer demanded, they devoured. At lunch, as colleagues spoke in rapid fire about mergers and bonuses, Tenzin's eyes drifted to the sky outside the window. He realized he hadn't looked up in weeks. The whisper returned. Not hers, his. What if letting go wasn't losing something, but finally making space? That evening, driven by an ache he couldn't name, Tenzin walked past his apartment. Past the gym. Past the noise. Until he reached a small, abandoned courtyard behind an old temple he had never noticed. There, under a canopy of tangled jasmine and dust, he sat. Just sat. No mantras. No plan. Only breath. A single leaf drifted down beside him, spiraling before it touched the earth. And without knowing why, he whispered, "I release what clings to me." It was the first time he had spoken to no one, and everything. That night, he returned to the same place. He brought nothing but a small bowl of water. He stared into it, allowing the ripples of his breath to echo on the surface. Each exhale was a surrender. Not of money, or ambition, but of need. The resistance remained, but so did the silence. And for the first time in years, Tenzin began to suspect that not knowing might be the beginning of truth. On the fourth evening, the courtyard was different. The jasmine had bloomed wider. The silence, thicker. And seated at the edge of the temple steps was an old man Tenzin had never seen before, cloaked in ochre, barefoot, still as stone. A begging bowl at his side, and eyes like caves that remembered fire. Tenzin hesitated. But the man gestured gently. Not to approach. Not to speak. Just to sit. They remained like that for hours, neither acknowledging the other, yet deeply aware. As twilight deepened, the monk finally spoke, not in question or teaching, but with a story. Once, a man carried a jar through the desert, desperate for water. When he found a spring, he could not drink. His jar was already full, of sand. Tenzin said nothing, but something in his chest cracked. He had been carrying so much. So long. The monk rose with grace only stillness can teach and stepped closer. He reached into his robe and offered Tenzin a smooth, round stone, black as night, light as ash. "Keep this," he said softly, "but only until you understand why you don't need it." Then, without waiting for a response, the monk disappeared behind the temple's shadow, his form swallowed by moonlight. That night, Tenzin placed the stone on his windowsill. Not as a relic, but as a reminder. A presence had entered his life, not to give him answers, but to unearth the questions he had buried beneath gold and deadlines. The path ahead was still unnamed. But now, he was no longer walking alone. Share this light with a heart seeking truth. The next morning, Tenzin did not rise with the sun to check his balance sheets or list of pending contracts. Instead, he awoke slowly, letting the silence fill the hollow spaces he once stuffed with noise. The stone on the windowsill caught the first light, its shadow softening against the wall. For the first time in years, he did not feel the compulsion to move. He simply breathed. Something subtle had changed. Not in the world, but in the way he met it. He walked past his office and into the small garden behind the house. It had always been there, but ignored, like a forgotten part of himself. The trees swayed gently, and the wind carried the scent of damp earth. He knelt down, not to pray, but to feel. His fingers brushed the soil. There was no ritual here. No grand gesture. Just a man, quietly remembering that he belonged to something older than his ambition. Tenzin closed his eyes and whispered words he hadn't known were waiting inside him. May what no longer serves me return to the earth. May what I cannot see find me when I am ready. And then, he did something his former self would have mocked. He reached into his pocket, pulled out 3 coins, and buried them in the ground beneath a flowering hibiscus. Not to make a wish, but to release one. He stood there for some time, breathing with the earth, feeling strangely lighter. He did not yet understand what he was becoming, but he knew it was not who he had been. The act was small, almost invisible, but it marked the beginning of a sacred return. A single gesture that said, "I'm willing." And for the first time, the wind seemed to whisper back, "So are we." The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. Letting go, he would learn, was not a single gesture, it was 1,000 small refusals to cling. Tenzin returned to the city, to the noise, the demands, the same polished faces asking the same relentless questions. But now, something had shifted. His hands hesitated before signing, his words carried silence behind them. He felt exposed, like a man walking barefoot through a marketplace. Doubt crept in. Was he being foolish? Was this surrender or simply failure in disguise? Old thoughts, sharp as broken glass, began to whisper. Prosperity is for the disciplined, the focused, the relentless. Stillness is weakness. He caught himself one evening, standing before a mirror, adjusting a tie for a meeting he no longer wished to attend. Behind his reflection, he imagined the buried coins quietly sleeping in the garden soil, untouched, unjudging. That memory, fragile and strange, held him steady. And then, slowly, unlikely allies emerged. A client who canceled, freeing him from a contract that drained him. A monk at a nearby temple who sat beside him without speaking, simply offering presence. A stranger on a train who wept softly while reading a letter, reminding him that everyone carries invisible weight. None of them offered advice, but each became a mirror. Still, the inner war raged. He had to say no to offers that shimmered with security. He had to face the loneliness of stepping off a ladder others were still climbing. And every time he wavered, he returned to the garden. He did not ask for answers, he offered listening. Some evenings, he would light a small candle beside the hibiscus and whisper his doubts into the dark. The flame never judged. And though no voice answered, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt expectant. As if life itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to choose differently. One evening, as autumn's chill began to seep into the city, Tenzin received news that unsettled the fragile ground beneath his feet. A longtime colleague, someone whose approval he had chased like a lifeline, had spoken harshly of his recent decisions, calling them reckless, selfish, even naive. The words landed like stones in his chest. The carefully built walls of certainty began to crumble. He felt the familiar sting of doubt rise, not just about his path, but about himself. Had he been foolish to believe there could be peace in surrender? Was he, after all, just running from responsibility? That night, sleep escaped him. Instead, he wandered to the rooftop of his apartment, where the city lights shimmered like distant stars. He pressed his hands against the cold metal railing, feeling the pulse of a world that never stops demanding. His thoughts churned. The belief that money was a fortress, a shield, a proof of worth, had that been a lie? And if so, what remained when the walls fell away? Tenzin closed his eyes and remembered the stone from the temple, smooth, dark, still in its mystery. He realized that what he feared most was not losing wealth, but losing himself. The self he had crafted, polished, defended against the void. A whisper rose inside him. What if the self you fear to lose is the very thing keeping you from becoming? The question echoed into the night, unsettling yet strangely freeing. For the first time, Tenzin saw that the deeper call was not about possessions or status. It was about being raw, unguarded, and vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, the path forward trembled into view, fragile, uncertain, but unmistakably real. The nights that followed were heavy with unrest. Tenzin found himself caught between two worlds, the safe, familiar fortress of his old life and the uncharted wilderness of surrender. The silence that once comforted now felt like a vast emptiness, stretching beyond his ability to endure. One evening, overwhelmed, he returned to the garden beneath the hibiscus tree, his heart raw and trembling. He knelt on the earth, the cool soil grounding him as tears traced paths down his cheeks. The stone from the temple lay beside him, dark and quiet, absorbing his sorrow without judgment. In the depths of that vulnerability, something shifted. Not a sudden answer, but a soft unveiling, a gentle unraveling of his tightly held fears. He saw, with painful clarity, how tightly he had clung to the illusion that money equaled safety, worth, and love. And how that belief had bound him, like chains forged in silent desperation. As he sat in the fading light, Tenzin lit a single candle and watched its flame flicker against the coming dusk. He whispered a prayer, not for riches, but for courage, the courage to step into the unknown without resistance. The candle's flame danced with the breath of the night. A quiet promise that even in darkness, light persists. This was the breakthrough, not the end of struggle, but the beginning of trust. Tenzin understood that to receive what he truly desired, he must first let go of the fear that had held him captive for so long. Walk gently now, and listen deeply, your path awaits. In the days that followed his breakthrough, Tenzin moved through life with a subtle transformation unfolding within him. The old restlessness softened, replaced by a quiet presence that allowed space for things to simply be. He began waking before dawn, sitting quietly by the window, watching the first light stretch across the sky. One morning, he brought a small bowl of water to the garden beneath the hibiscus tree. He knelt barefoot on the earth, tracing gentle circles on the water's surface with his fingertips. Each ripple became a meditation, an echo of his breath and a symbol of the gentle changes happening inside. He whispered an intention, soft and steady. May I release the ties that bind me, and open to the flow of true abundance. The coins he had buried days before now felt less like sacrifices and more like seeds planted in fertile ground. Tenzin no longer saw money as a fortress to guard or a prize to chase. Instead, it was a reflection of the harmony he sought within. The walls between desire and surrender began to dissolve, revealing a landscape where prosperity could be both spiritual and tangible. At work, his decisions carried a new calm. He listened more deeply, trusted his intuition, and welcomed uncertainty as part of the journey rather than an enemy. His relationships softened too, where once he demanded control, he now offered presence. This alignment was not perfection, but acceptance, a gentle dance between effort and ease. The stone from the temple still rested on his windowsill, a silent companion in this unfolding peace. With each breath, Tenzin felt more whole, more open. He was learning to receive without grasping, to welcome abundance without fear. Carry this quiet flame forward, and let your heart be the lantern in the night. Weeks later, Tenzin faced his greatest challenge yet. An unexpected offer arrived, a lucrative contract that promised wealth beyond his current means, but demanded sacrificing the very balance he had begun to nurture. It was the familiar call of security, wrapped in the language of success. He hesitated. The old voice whispered, "This is what you wanted. Don't lose it now." But deeper inside, a different voice stirred, a quiet reminder of the stone, the garden, the candlelight prayers. That evening, Tenzin returned to the garden, now bathed in moonlight. He sat barefoot on the soft earth, eyes fixed on the flowering hibiscus. In his hands, he held a piece of parchment, on which he had written the fears and expectations tied to the contract. With deliberate care, he lit a small bundle of dried jasmine and incense, letting the fragrant smoke curl into the night air. He folded the parchment into a small square, watching as the flame embraced it, turning fear into ash. As the smoke drifted upward, he whispered, "I release what no longer serves my soul, and trust that true prosperity finds me in stillness." The test was not the contract itself, but the choice, to cling or to flow. Tenzin chose flow. The next morning, he declined the offer, feeling a weight lift that no sum of money could measure. His courage was not without cost, but in surrender, he discovered a deeper wealth, the freedom to align with his truth. This was the final threshold, where desire and letting go met, and everything found its place. Let your heart be brave, and your steps light on the path ahead. Tenzin woke one morning with a stillness in his chest that he had never known before, a calm that no longer wavered in the face of uncertainty or loss. The stone from the temple rested quietly on his windowsill, its presence no longer a reminder of burden or question, but a symbol of wisdom softly carried within. It was as if the stone had absorbed not only the weight of his doubts but also the light of his unfolding truth. His life had not become perfect. The world around him still demanded, shifted, and challenged. But Tenzin himself had changed in ways invisible yet profound. He moved with a quiet strength born not from grasping, but from surrender, an embodied knowing that abundance is not something to be seized, but a current to be trusted. The garden behind his home flourished under his gentle care, a mirror to the peace growing within. Flowers blossomed not because he forced growth, but because he learned to nurture with patience and presence. Each leaf, each petal, was a lesson in the sacred rhythm of giving and receiving, of holding and releasing. At work, Tenzin no longer chased the illusion of control. He made decisions rooted in clarity and compassion, listening deeply to both the world and the quiet voice within. His relationships deepened as well, no longer transactional or guarded, but open and authentic, reflecting the harmony he had found between desire and detachment. Most importantly, Tenzin shed the old limiting belief that money was a fortress or a test of morality. Instead, he came to understand that prosperity and spirituality are intertwined threads of the same tapestry. To want abundance was not selfish, but human, and to receive it gracefully was an act of alignment. Tenzin had become living proof of a deeper truth. Everything we desire, peace, love, wealth, can indeed find us, but only when we let go of the desperate grasp and open ourselves to receive with an open heart. His resurrection was not a sudden victory, but a gentle awakening, an invitation to all who watch to trust the slow unfolding of their own truth. Let this story kindle the spark within you, and carry its light wherever you go. Tenzin stepped back into the rhythm of daily life, but he was no longer the man who once chased shadows of wealth and worth. The city's noise still hummed around him, but inside, a profound stillness had taken root, a sanctuary untouched by external tides. He found joy in simple moments, the warmth of sunlight through leaves, the soft laughter of a stranger, the quiet breath between heartbeats. The garden thrived, a living testament to patience and surrender, reminding him that abundance is cultivated, not seized. His story, though deeply personal, echoed a universal truth, that when we release the tight grip on desire and fear, life flows to meet us in unexpected, generous ways. If Tenzin's journey speaks to something stirring within you, know this: your own path is waiting, unfolding with every step of courage and letting go. The transformation you seek is not a distant dream but a quiet awakening in this very moment. Thank you for walking this path alongside Tenzin. If this story touched your heart, share its light with others who may need it. Your voice can be the gentle guide for someone still lost in the noise. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Zen Companion, so we may continue to explore these sacred journeys together. May peace find you when you are ready to receive it. Until next time, walk softly, breathe deeply, and remember, everything you desire finds you when you let go.